Welcome to the Lemonade Stand Stories podcast. Tune in every Thursday as we share inspirational stories from the world's greatest creators, entrepreneurs, and go-getters about how they've turned life's lemons into lemonade. And now, here's your host of Lemonade Stand Stories, Charan Prabhakar.
What is going on, guys? This is Charan Prabhakar with the Lemonade Stand Stories podcast, and today is a good day. I am here with a dear, delightful friend of mine, Raquel Baldwin, who just barely had a fudge cookie with a Reese's peanut butter cup on top, and she's extremely excited about that decision. Raquel and I had the privilege of meeting. You know, actually, I met you at an audition. I was auditioning for a Chamber Media commercial. Now, just so you guys have some background, Raquel does a lot of different things at Chamber Media, and we're going to talk about how she got to be in the exec team at Chamber Media. But this is how we first met. You were casting a commercial, and I was auditioning for that commercial. And even, I don't think I got that commercial, but we hit it off. And I remember being like, oh my gosh, she was super awesome. She was super cool, and she was super fun and everything. And so I was like, wait a minute, okay, forget about this audition. I want to know everything about Raquel. And then we were talking about it, and you are a former Knicks dancer, which is very exciting. I'm a former dancer in my bedroom.
Yes, that's all that matters.
Well, yeah.
Highest level.
And it's actually kind of funny about that because there's a movie called Unbreakable. I don't know if you've ever heard of this movie, Unbreakable. It's by M. Night Shyamalan.
Yeah.
And in this movie, Bruce Willis plays a character who is like Mr. Unbreakable. He can't break it all. He's invincible.
Yeah.
Samuel L. Jackson plays Mr. Glass, who is the opposite. He's very fragile and he breaks and stuff. There's like this opposite extreme. And I use that example to describe my relationship with my roommate in California, because my roommate in California was Benji Schwimmer, who won So You Think You Can Dance and all these awesome things. And I was the guy that would trip just walking. So it was just like this really cool dichotomy. So there, dancing, I should never even lead with that. But anyway, I
think you should prove it. I think we should.
No, I think
we can all decide right now.
We can all decide right now on this podcast right here. No, but it was so cool, like, because you're a born performer, like you've just been like a shining light and doing all kinds of cool things. We belong to the same Utah acting agency, but you were an actress, had did all that fun stuff, and now you're over at Chamber. And I'm super excited to hear about this journey. But yeah, welcome to the podcast.
Thank
Raquel.
you. It's good to be here.
I know. I'm so excited. I'm so glad we got you. I know you're a very, very busy woman. You have all kinds of fun stuff going on. But let's start from the beginning, Raquel. Okay. I want the people to know what I feel in my heart, which is why you're so awesome. So because the thing is,
I only had to pay Charan a small fee for all these compliments.
Yeah, absolutely. And they were all in rupees. It was totally in rupees too, so it's like a fraction of a dollar. But yeah, so how did you get involved in performing to begin with? Because you do all kinds of performing, not just acting on stage or in film, right?
Yeah. So I started dancing when I was little. I asked my parents how I got started, and they said every day all I would do is ask to be in dance lessons. And they said when people would come to the house, I'd make them, my parents' friends, I would make them sit down and watch me dance. I'm like, oh, you guys sit down and I'll be right back. And I would like put costumes on and like dance and put music on and perform. And I had no idea. I don't remember any of that. But so I started taking dance classes when I was 8. And that was...
And you grew up where?
I grew up in Iowa. So I grew up in this really, really small town in Iowa. There actually was not a dance studio in my town. We had to drive to the big city, which wasn't even a big city, but drive to the next couple of towns over to go to dance class. Yeah. And I happened to be pretty good at it.
Yeah.
It was, I think, kind of a God-given gift of mine. And yeah, so I just started dancing. And I also, I feel like dancing has had such a big impact on my life.
Right.
Because it was something also, like, growing up was like, my parents were a little stressed, seemed like a lot. We were kind of poor. And so I remember always hearing them like argue about money.
Yeah.
And I remember my dad worked at John Deere, so he was in the union. I remember them going on strike. Well, I thought it was a couple times. I remember one time in particular, and like food was really low and it was kind of scarce. And I remember hearing them talk about, oh, I think we'll have to like cut out like dance classes for Raquel, like places like, and I overheard them talking, and I just remember like being like, I've got to figure out a way to be able to, keep going to dance, but not stress out my parents. And I think I was like really aware of that. So when I was 12, I started teaching dance.
Oh, wow. You did?
Yeah, to 3 to 5 year olds. And I love this. The first place I taught dance was in Moline, Illinois, which is across totally different state. Across the bridge. We lived right along the Mississippi River. So it was probably like a 30-minute drive maybe to get over there. And every Saturday I taught. And I remember my dad taking me. And now that I'm an adult and I have kids, and now that I can recognize some of those sacrifices, I realized how cool it was, because it probably cost my dad more money in gas to drive me there than I was making. I was probably making I don't know, $5 an hour or something like that. And then to drive me home. But the fact that he did it just instilled a lot of lessons in me of, working hard and being self-sufficient and, and developing a talent, and then being able to work hard at it and have it, pay off. So so I remember thinking, I've got to figure out a way. So I started teaching, pay for my own dance classes. And then I started teaching at the dance studio that I took dance classes at. And then I was pretty soon running the dance studio. By 14, I was literally in charge of the whole thing. I was taking payments. I was doing accounts receivable. So if somebody didn't pay in time, I was calling, doing all the scheduling, hiring. I was kind of doing all of it.
Wow.
So it blessed my life, because I was able to develop a talent that led to a professional career, which I really loved. But it also alleviated a lot of stress from my parents. And I noticed that was something they were super proud of.
Yeah.
So it gave them something to focus on that I knew was, bringing a lot of joy and happiness, which I wasn't just doing it for them, by the way. I loved it and it was for me, but I just kind of, it developed into something more, I think, because of the circumstances of growing up and growing up kind of poor and not having a lot. And then also being able to recognize my parents were doing the best that they could, you know what I mean? Instead of I wish so-and-so were my parents and she has everything and her parents, they can afford anything. And instead I just remember my parents working really hard and having almost this feeling of guilt that I was, I was costing them money when they had to pay for dance classes and feeling okay, what can I do? I have to turn this situation, kind of a lemon into lemonade. Right. So kind of turn the situation around so that I can have the things that I want and, not
stress out your parents.
Stress out my parents. So,
well, it's interesting because a lot of people could have taken that victim mentality.
Yeah.
But you chose to have self-sufficiency and an abundant mentality and saying, okay, I'm going to learn. And not only did you learn to dance better by teaching, you also learned the principles of business.
Yeah. Yes,
and what makes business succeed and what makes them fail. And you were running your own dance studio at such a young age, which is amazing. So fast forward that to maybe going to, I don't know, dancing for the Knicks. How did that all transition?
So and there's a whole spiritual journey I had along the way.
Which I love because I know we can talk about that.
We can talk about that in a little bit.
Yeah.
I feel like I could talk about that forever. But basically I landed at BYU my freshman year of college. I was in the MDT program, and my first semester in, everyone was going down to audition for Starlight Express, which is an Andrew Lloyd Webber musical on roller skates, if you've never seen it. Super fun. I never heard of it. Growing up, my parents weren't in the industry.
Yeah.
So I never, we didn't go see musicals or shows or really study or listen to them. The only things that we went to were my dance recitals. You know what I mean? So, and even in high school, we didn't have, we had one musical a year, and then the next year was a play, but we didn't have any programs at school at all to develop anything like that. So I wasn't really proficient in musical theater. So I had never heard of the musical or seen it, but everyone was auditioning and I was like, oh, can I come? I just really want to go to Vegas because the auditions were in Vegas.
Sure.
I've never been to Vegas. I'm from this little farm town in Iowa. and we didn't travel on vacations. Our vacations growing up were camping in the park, like Scott Conner Park, which was, 20 minutes away from our house. And that was Perfect. And then the only other vacation we had was visiting my grandma in Michigan and then my other grandma like in a different city in Iowa. So we never traveled. So I was really excited to go to Vegas. I was like, I want to go to, this big city, right? So I went along and we talked about this before the podcast, totally not prepared. And the morning of, I remember like being really tired and because we were out late and my girlfriend's like, hey, you gotta go to the audition. I'm like, oh, it's fine. I was like, I really just kind of wanted to like go to Vegas. She's like, no, you gotta go. And I was like, do you have any sheet music? Like I didn't bring anything, you know? Yeah. And she's like, oh, you can you can borrow my sheet music. I was like, all right, let's go. So I went and I ended up booking the show.
Oh, wow.
So I left BYU. So I ended up only doing like that semester. I left BYU and that was like my first, and I had worked at theaters and worked at other jobs and stuff before, but that was my first like major, it was like an equity show, major show. It was in Vegas at the Hilton. So I did that for a year and a half. And then I was like, I want to go to New York. And it's kind of interesting because the show was extending and only had like 3 months left. And then the show was closing. But my contract was up. And so they wanted everybody to stay, obviously, because they didn't want to have to bring anybody else on for 3 months. It had been running for, I think, four or 5 years. I was like, no, I want to like go to New York and I'm ready for the next thing. And that was kind of always my life is like wanting to do, like, I was super adventurous, wanting to do lots of different things. And so I was the only one that left. Like the whole entire cast of like 30 people stayed. Yeah. They're like, why aren't you staying? It's like 3 more months. Yeah. I'm like, no, I want to get to New York. So, and I, of course, never been to New York. So I go to New York. I just buy a plane ticket and I show up and
Wait, did you know where you're gonna stay? Like what?
So I had a friend from BYU that I met at MTT that he graduated BYU and he was living in New York. Okay. So and it's so funny, like after living in New York and then looking back at like so many things, I realized how nice it was that because he like came to the airport because I was like, oh, when you fly in, people pick you up from the airport, and drive you. Yeah. Well, there are no cars in New York. I mean, there are, but like people don't drive cars. But I was like, oh, can you meet me at the airport? And he's like, sure. But like, he had to take like
oh my gosh,
the bus and the subway. And it was like a whole thing to get there, and I didn't even think about it. It was just like, oh. And so he was there, and anyway, so I got there, and I was staying with him. And he's like, hey, I was like, so what are you doing today? He's like, oh, I have an audition. I'm like, oh, can I come? Yeah. He's like, yeah, I guess it's for anybody. I was like, awesome. So I went, it was an audition for Fame, which European tour. And I ended up booking that. Super blessed.
Amazing.
And, and so I left for Europe. Like, I went home and there's kind of a funny story about like the role I ended up getting with that. But I ended up going home to Iowa, packing up some stuff so that I can move to Europe for 6 months. So I did that. When I got back, I got back and I auditioned for the Broadway tour of Evita and went on tour with that for a year. And then when I came back, it was like first day back in New York, and my buddy Angelo was rehearsing in a dance studio. I was like, oh, I'm back in New York. Like, I'll come meet you for lunch. So I go meet him for lunch at the dance studio, and in New York, they would have whiteboards, and they would have in every single studio what was going on. So I was just like in the lobby waiting for him, and I see that they have like New York Knicks auditions in like Studio 4 or whatever. And I was like, oh, I wonder if I could audition. And I'm like in my jeans and flip-flops. Like I'm not there to like audition and go to meet him. And he was rehearsing in one of the studios he was in Lion King. And, or he was, I don't know if that's the show he was rehearsing for at the time. So I go over to like Studio 5 and I open the door and there's girls like stretching. And I was like, hey, is there an audition going on in here? They're like, yeah. I'm like, what are you doing here? And I was like, oh, have you guys started? And they're like, no, we're about to start. And I was like, oh, can I audition? They're like, I guess. And I was like, okay, great. So I just like kick off my flip-flops, no headshot or resume, right?
Amazing.
Of course with me.
Of course.
So I'm in like jeans and a t-shirt and like not super comfortable to dance in. But, and they had started the season, but they were replacing one girl who like wasn't working out. Yeah. And so the season had to open, but they'd been rehearsing for like 3-4 weeks. And it was about to open, like I think 3 weeks later was like opening game. So I auditioned, and then I ended up booking that. This doesn't happen to me all the time, by the way. But
that's amazing, yeah.
But I feel like I've been blessed with like lots of blessings. Because there are plenty of people that were just as good as I was. Yeah. But I felt like God was always just his hand was in my life and wonderful things were happening. So that's how I came. And then I started rehearsing and I was a Knicks dancer, and that's how
that one went.
That's how that job came about.
So, I have to ask you because, and it's interesting because in many ways, like our lives kind of mirror each other, not in the dancing sense, but in the sense of like, you just kind of go up and like just good things just kind of show up and happen. Right. And it's funny because, we were having this discussion of like, oh yeah, I don't really prepare for a lot of things.
Yeah.
Like I don't prepare for auditions. I don't do any of that stuff. I'm like, oh wow. Cause I tried preparing, but like sometimes you just kind of show up and go, yeah, whatever. Let's just see what happens.
Yeah.
And more often than not, it kind of like rolls in your favor. Yeah. Right. And you recognize, hey, it is the hand of God that's like helping with all of these things, which I totally agree. Yeah. Cause I've seen his hand in my life so many times, I can't even count. Yeah. But why do you think that your life was able to flow like that, right? Because you show up to this Knicks audition like so random, last minute. Yeah. There's all these other women there that are like preparing and working really hard or stretching. Not that you didn't, but like then you just kind of show up and go, yeah, let's do it. It'll be awesome. It'll be fun. And you winged it, and winged it, but like like just had fun with it, and you ended up getting it. And it was just like probably that one role, I'm assuming, right? Yeah. And everyone else was like, dang it, why did she have to come in at the last second, But why do you think it was that like in these situations where you just kind of like randomly show up and then things just work out?
I think it's probably attributed to a few things, but I would say the main thing would be I feel like God is always like he's always had a hand in my life. And I feel like in my life, the most important thing in my life is God. And so the other things matter, but not nearly as much. Yeah. And I think that in very particularly in this entertainment industry, but in all parts of my life, I think like, we'll just take this one example of the Knicks audition where it's possible that some of those girls, it was like, this was like their whole life, right? Like their whole life was like this audition and like dance. And if it didn't work out, like their life was like over, meaningless, right? And for me, it was like, I love to dance. I love to perform. I love to do this. I love to do this. Like there's so many things that I love. And dance was definitely like what I loved to do for a long time. But it also was like, if I don't get this job, then I'll get another one. Yeah. And if I don't get the next one, then I'll get another one. And if I don't get 100 of those, then that's totally fine because it didn't define me. Yeah. So being a dancer or being a good at dancing or getting a job didn't define my happiness. So, and I think that just, I had just an attitude of, not that I didn't care because, I was pursuing a career that I loved and I cared about, but I think I just think I had a different approach to the whole thing. Yeah. And so I think that I didn't come off as maybe needy or desperate for a job or like, oh my gosh, like if I don't get this job, I can't pay my bills. Like those things never really like crossed my mind. Right. And I think that to the core, that was probably the biggest reason why. And everything that I do is that God is the most important thing in my life and everything else is kind of secondary. Yeah,
it's kind of like it's kind of like in the background a little bit.
Yeah, so like my perspective and things changed. So going to an audition wasn't like life or death for me, or it wasn't like if I don't get this, I'm no good and I'm nothing, and like it didn't affect my self-esteem if I did or didn't get a job. And so, and I think that's also you're an actor, like you walk into a room and you exude a lot of confidence, and then the people that are looking to hire feel confident that they're going to make a decision and it's going to be the right one. And so I think that helped too, because I had kind of a fearlessness and also kind of an attitude of take it or leave it. Yeah. And I think that comes from a lot of things. So I think that my fearlessness and like confidence, a lot of that came from my childhood and being really good at dance. And getting a lot of attention for it. Like I got a lot of attention for it. I was good at it. And when you have a skill, when you're like literally standing next to somebody and you're both doing the same thing and you have a mirror in front of you, you can kind of see how you compare with the other people in the room. Sure. Yeah. You know what I mean? So it's like, oh, this is something that I'm good at. Or singing, not something I'm good at. absolutely terrible. Same thing. You'd have like two people singing a song and one person will sound way better and everyone can hear it, right?
Right.
I was always the person that could not sing.
Yeah.
I have so many stories to tell you about that. Oh my gosh, we'll get to it. But,
yeah.
And I think also is like my parents instilled a lot of confidence in me through dance. And I think that bled into every part of my life. And as a mom, one of the things that I've always been really passionate about is putting my kids in activities and letting them
explore and thrive.
Explore and flourish and thrive in something and letting them pick. I have them kind of in everything. My one daughter, who's going to be 5 next month, she's been in dance and tumbling and she's in ninja classes right now and soccer and like just everything and anything. And then I'm going to let her gravitate towards what she likes. And then when she finds something she's really passionate about, I want to support her. I support her in all of it. But because for me, I feel like my parents supported me in dance. Like my dad, it's so funny that you brought up Unbreakable. Oh my gosh, this is like so serendipitous. I've got to tell you the story.
Okay.
So my parents would take me to auditions. There were no auditions where I lived because it was such a small town. So any audition for anything the big, quote unquote, was out of state or at least out of like 4 hours of where I lived. For the most part. And there was an audition. This is so funny. Like I laugh at this because looking back, it's so ridiculous that I even like had my dad do this. But Unbreakable was filming and they were casting out of Chicago. Chicago is like 3 hours from my hometown in Iowa. They were casting extras, which I know now is like literally anybody in the world.
Yeah, you can just go walk on set and be an extra.
You literally just walk on set.
Yeah.
There's like nothing. My dad drove me to Chicago because it was like, oh, we're holding auditions. We're looking for people. And it was either the way that I read it or maybe it really was he like wanted to see people like specifically. I think some of the extras roles were featured. So they wanted to like handpick people. We drive all the way to Chicago.
Yeah.
For Unbreakable auditions.
Amazing.
For extras.
Yeah.
And I'm maybe 15. I can't drive yet. So my dad has to drive me. So I'm like under the age of 16, right?
Yeah.
I could have been like 12. I don't even remember how old I was at the time. And I remember like going into the casting office and him being like, you guys live in Iowa? Like you guys drove here from a different state to like give me your headshot for extras. Like you could have mailed it, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, I know. Yeah, I'm like, you know, I didn't even have to audition. It was literally like just looking at people. Like, because we're extras, we don't have lines. There's nothing to audition for, right? And I remember them being like, oh, well, this would shoot. And it was like it was like, I want to say there was like a baseball scene, like a stadium scene.
Sure.
Maybe. It's been so long since I've seen the movie, but they needed like literally like thousands of extras. Like anybody in the world could have been in the movie, right? Nobody was going to see me on camera. And I think it was like some stadium scene where like, or some big crowd scene.
Right.
And they're like, well, this would shoot for, you know, a couple days, whatever. And basically it would cost you guys more money to come here and stay at a hotel. Like, why are you even here? Right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's okay. We're available, you know?
Yeah.
I didn't get it because I think they just felt so bad for me.
Yeah.
They're like, we can't make this like poor girl and her dad. He'd have to take
a
week off work and pay for hotel and food and gas. Like, and I think I was probably getting paid like $50 a day.
Yeah.
At most, right?
Yeah.
So, but I just remember thinking how great it was. Because later when I looked back, I remember thinking, that was for extra work. And my dad was like so supportive of me and like was so like proud of me and wanted to like see me succeed that he like took time off work, drove me to Chicago. Anyway, and we went on another trip to St. Louis once for Sister Act 2, when they had like kids in the choir or something. It was singing and I was terrible at singing. And I knew there was no way I would ever book it. But of course I'm like, let's go.
Yeah.
And my dad's like, let's go, you know? And so they were really, really great at supporting me. And so throughout, because of that and because of, you know, just sort of like, just the attention I kind of got from dance instilled tons of confidence and it bled into other parts of my life. And I think that just carried with me in all aspects. And I think that's probably part of like the ability I have to just like walk into a room and have sort of this like, even though I haven't prepared, most people are like, oh my gosh, I have to prepare. I don't know what's going on. I'm so nervous. I don't know. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, what's going on? Yeah. This is my job. So I'm here, you guys, you're welcome. Yeah. Like, you know, that was kind of always my attitude, even though I didn't actually say those things. But really, it was really rooted in God.
I love that because the thing is like at the very end of the day, you know, you were saying like it's rooted in God. And when you're rooted in God, you're rooted in goodness.
Yes.
So it's like, hey, it doesn't matter how the goodness shows up. I just know that it's going to be good and it's going to be amazing.
Yeah.
And then when you start letting go of like the attachments of like how things are going to show up.
Yeah.
I started living more like that. And I'm like, whoa, it's way better to live like that because then God can surprise you.
Yeah.
And his surprises are way cooler than anything I could have thought of.
Yes.
And so I love that. Like I remember I was on an audition for some HBO show, and it's this show called Manic or something like that, and I had to play like a school teacher. Mm-hmm. And so I go into the producer session, and I go to this room, and I'm not sure what to expect. And usually it's just like one person on the camera, and then it's like the casting director reading it, right? I go in, then this entire room is full of people, producers, teachers, like all these people like from Hollywood or not HBO, like looking at me like, okay, let's do this audition. I'm like, great, everyone's here. You guys all made it. Okay, I'm so glad you guys all made it. I wasn't sure if you're gonna show up, but let's begin now. You know?
Oh my gosh, I love that.
And they just started rolling because I think most people were like afraid.
Oh, of course.
You know, but I was like, I'm gonna take this to my advantage.
Yeah.
And so we did this scene, and the director really liked it. And then she said, okay, now we want you to teach us something. And like it was just like put me on the spot, you know. She'd go, "Oh, we want you to teach us something." I'm like, "Great! I love doing magic tricks, so I'm gonna teach you guys how to do a magic trick. I need a volunteer from who wants to come up." And they're like, "Oh!" And like it was almost like I had prepared for something that I was just making it up as I go, right?
Of course.
And I ended up getting the part because they were just like it was just fun, right?
Yeah.
It was just we made it fun. But I find, and I don't know about your life, but I find for me, when I live like that, I mean, it's not like you're not preparing because you have prepared. You've been preparing your entire life, right?
Yeah.
You've been preparing your entire life. I mean, you prepared as a 12-year-old.
Yeah.
You know, you prepared as a 14-year-old running a business. You've been preparing so that when God can put you in certain places, you can shine and you can shine magnificently. I remember I was filming a movie that it was like my own movie, and it was like so low budget. And we had to film the ending 3 different times because we hated the ending every single time we filmed elsewhere. We're like, dang it, guys, let's get it right this time, I swear. And so we were in LA, and we had to come back to Utah to shoot the scene. And we had like 15 pages to shoot, and it was all action. So you know when you're shooting action, time is not your friend. Like, you need a lot more time than you think you realize, right? And it was like 15 pages of it. I'm like, you guys, can we shoot 15 pages of action in a week? Like, let's see if we can make this happen. So the plan was to leave on Monday or something like that. Yeah, come on a Monday or come on a Sunday or something like that. And then Monday was going to be a preparation day of like preparing pre-production. And then Tuesday through Friday, it was really just 4 days of shooting. That's what it was. That was supposed to be the plan. However, so I'm getting ready to leave. It's going to be Sunday. And then my manager calls me out of the blue and says, Sharon, you have a callback. And I'm like, what are you talking about? She goes, yeah, you need to go to this audition for this callback for a Clorox commercial. I'm like, wait, what? Like, and she's like, yeah, remember why you did this one? They liked it because I was supposed to scream in the commercial, and they just love the way you scream. I'm like, thank you, I think.
Thank you.
So,
that's my special skills on my resume.
Yeah, so they're like, all right, I'll just go to this audition and I'll scream for them. So it's a Saturday, and normally they don't have auditions on Saturday. So I go in, I scream, and they're like, yo, it's so great. We love it. I'm like, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I worked on my lines on that one. I really screamed well. Anyway, then so I did that. Oh no, I'm messing up the story. Sorry. I had done the audition, and then she said the callback was on Monday. That's when I needed to go. But I'm supposed to be in Utah Monday. So I'm like, crud, what am I going to do? So I told my buddy, hey, drive my car to Utah. I'm going to go to the audition, and then I'm going to fly there. So I do the audition, and I fly to Utah, and I'm supposed to start filming. And I'm the main character of this movie, so I've got to be there, right? So I get up, and it's call time 6 a.m. And so 6 a.m. and I got to Utah at like 12 or 1 in the morning the night before. So I'm kind of exhausted, but I'm like, all right, whatever, let's just do this thing. So I'm filming it, and around 11 o'clock in the morning, and we have a pretty long day, I get a call from my manager saying, Sharon, you booked it. I'm like, great, when does it shoot? Like in a week or two? She got, no, Thursday. It shoots Thursday. I'm like, no one cannot shoot Thursday. I refuse to believe that it shoots Thursday because I am filming this movie. She's like, Sharon, it's a national commercial. You have to go.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my gosh. I'm like, okay. I'm like, guys, everyone, and I grabbed them all. I'm like, we have to pow out immediately. I said, I booked this and I have to go do it. They're like, okay, we have to rechange everything. So just like that, we like took a quick little break and we rechanged the entire schedule. We're like, and they're like, in order for us to get this done, we have to shoot everything with you in it today, like right now. I'm like, yeah. And all the action sequence. I'm like, okay. So we shoot for 26 hours straight.
Gosh.
Okay. Just crazy. And you know how this is, right? So we're going and going and going. So we'll start at 6 a.m. ended up wrapping at 9 a.m. the next day. So then they could like do all the other scenes without me being there. And the last 2 hours of shooting, I mean, like periodically I could take breaks and I would like go close my eyes for like a half hour and stuff and then come back. And I was just so tired. But the last 2 hours from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. was my fight scene. You know, I'm supposed to do this fight sequence. And I am so exhausted. Like I have no energy in me. And I also have like, I'm like, guys, what crafty do we have? What cookies do we have left? And they're like, we have nothing except for baby carrots. I'm like, all right, carrot me. And so they would like between takes, they like feed me like a carrot. I'm like, oh, okay. All right, I got some more energy. Let's go. And then we like do this fight scene and it was ridiculous, right? So we finish it and at 9 a.m. like we're collapsing. Those guys are collapsing. They're like, we're dead. We got to sleep. And I'm like, yeah, I got to rush off to the airport. So I rush off to the airport to go catch my flight back to LA. And I go and I'm just like so exhausted. I see and it was just like weird because it's like as I'm getting ready to pack my bags, I see President Nelson, like, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like, well, there's an apostle. Yeah, he was an apostle back then. And so then I go and I'm standing in line to get on the flight and I see this other Indian guy stand beside me and I'm like, wait, what other Indian guys are there in Utah besides me? This is crazy. And so I turn and I look, it's M. Night Shyamalan. Okay.
No way.
And I'm like, what is happening? So M. Night Shyamalan, in case you guys don't know, is the director of Unbreakable and Sixth Sense and amazing movies like that, Signs. And so I'm like, I have to talk to him. This is it. This is like, I mean, I'm so deliriously tired. This could be a figment of my imagination. I could maybe be seeing him, but I'm going to talk to him. So I talked to him and he was super cool. And anyway, we talked for a little bit. Then I go catch my flight, go to LA, go do my part the next day, fly back home, back to Utah that night after the shooting. And then Friday, I'm filming all day in Utah again for the movie. Like, it was the most crazy week of all time, right? And I remember like just being so utterly exhausted. Mm-hmm. And yet so many freaking memories were made, right? And it was all because like I felt myself in that sense, like kind of like rooted in God and realizing like, oh my gosh, like he can make so many awesome things happen. Yeah. And the cool thing with it as well, and tell me if this is true for you, one of the things, it's not like I've made like tons and tons of money, but what I've made are tons and tons of memories.
Yeah.
And they're amazing memories. And they're incredible memories. And they're memories with like some really good people, like good friends and things that I can look back on and be like, oh my gosh, I can just keep thinking about those memories for the rest of my life. Like they were so much fun.
Yeah.
And I realized like, to me, that's where worth truly lies.
Yeah.
Is in the memories, because I don't look back and be like, oh my gosh, I loved that transaction where I made a lot of money.
Yeah.
I don't care about that.
Not at all.
Like what is that?
Yeah.
But when I think about, wow, I loved that relationship that I made. And I loved like that one moment where two of my cast members laughed at some random joke or some random thing, right?
Yeah.
And that's why I even got the movie business to begin with, was those memories, right? Now, when you moved over, because I know you were doing all these different things and we can talk about whatever, but when you got into Chamber Media, like how did that all transition come about? Because I feel like you're constantly creating memories with your friends there,
Yeah.
And you transition from acting to now you're directing. You're the creator, and I was so proud of you for directing that one commercial with Brian Regan, like one of the greatest comedians of all time, in my opinion. Anyway, so how did that all?
He's so funny.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. How did that all happen?
So that's a great question. By the way, I love your stories. I've got to ask you a question about M. Night Shyamalan.
You have to.
Did you were you like, hey, I'm like an actor. I want to be one of what did you guys talk about? I want to know.
What? I didn't. I actually chose not to talk about that. But what was interesting was M. Night Shyamalan is from the same hometown I'm from in India.
No.
Like how crazy is that? Like he was born in a place called Pondicherry. And I have tons of family in Pondicherry.
Mhm.
I mean, of all the places in India, like, right? So so I talked to him and I said, hey man, like, and the thing was, a lot of people didn't recognize him here in Utah, right?
Yeah.
But I said, hey man, like, I just want to let you know, like, I love your films. Thanks for making them. He's like, oh yeah. And I said, you know, funny enough, I'm from the same hometown you're from in Pondicherry. He's like, are you serious? I'm like, yeah. And so we were kind of like laughing and joking about that. He was trying to get on the flight that I was already going to get on. So he didn't actually end up getting on it.
Oh.
So, but we just talked for that brief moment. But it was just like a cool thing of like, how random is it?
Yes.
Right. And that's what it is. It's like with God, it's like so random and so amazing. Like, wow, I did not see that one coming.
It's so great to be able to recognize like God's hand in your life. And that is part of the reason why in all the like auditions and all the work related things and even like life related things and relationships and things, I've never put pressure on myself for things because it's like, you know what? God has literally guided my life in every single like way, big and small. And I can recognize that instead of just being like, oh, like this is just coincidence or, you know, whatever. I've been able to recognize.
It's too many, right?
It's too many.
There's too many. And
it's God. Yeah,
it's so
for
funny
sure.
because I've had conversations with people that are like, oh, well, you just got lucky. And I'm like, how often can I get lucky?
No, like people are like, wow, you've gotten so lucky. But I'm like, nope, I am not lucky. That is all God. Because I was like, there are plenty of people that I like, plenty of friends in New York and they lived in LA and even here in Utah that are just as talented as I am, you know, just as XYZ. But I was like, the
orchestration
X factor is not me. That is God, right? And being able to like have faith that he is leading my life in the direction that is best for me takes all the pressure off. Because I'm like, hey, if I get this job, it's like meant to be. And if I don't, as long as I prepare, as long as I'm ready for the opportunity or ready for whatever it is that is to come my way, then that's all I can do. And then everything else is like, this is not up to me. I don't have to put any pressure on myself to like perform in a certain way to get this job. And I think it's just taken a lot of I don't really get nervous for a lot of things.
No.
I don't like put any pressure on myself. Sometimes I should so that I'm like a little bit more on top of my life because I'm like, oh, that'll happen the way it's supposed to happen.
Yeah,
and like,
I know.
Sometimes I'm like, maybe I'm a little too extreme that way and I should like, you know.
Like start taking more control.
Have a little bit of control, but I'm just sort of like, I'm not like a control freak at all. I'm like, whatever.
Yeah.
And then sometimes I'm like, I should try to rein things in a little bit in my life. But I feel like that is like, I've had so many cases and even like in small things, I'm like, why is this happening? Like I remember when I lived in New York, I did the Christmas show, Radio City Music Hall, the Rockettes Christmas show. Yeah. And then they asked me to come back. So at the end of the season, they asked like certain amount of people to like come back the next year. And I was like, oh no, I'm moving to LA. And so they're like, okay. And I move out to LA. Or I think they send you the letter later because I was in LA and then they sent me the letter saying, we'd love to have you come back for this year's again. And I just booked a movie and I was like, oh no, I'm like going to be in LA, being a big star, right? And then then it was after 9/11 hit. And so things kind of shut down. There was like the whole anthrax threat.
Yes.
And so people weren't taking like, used to submit like by, you know, your agent or manager sending over like headshots and resumes in the mail in an envelope and they weren't opening envelopes and it was this whole thing. So things kind of like were shutting down. And so I was like, oh gosh, I don't actually have a lot going on for the Christmas season. So I remember calling and being like, hey, I'm available now. If you guys, they're like, oh, we've already cast everybody. Yeah. And I was like, oh. And I was like, and I remember booking this Christmas show in Whittier, California, which is like the smallest town ever. Yeah. And I was like, what am I doing in this show? I think the audience, there were like maybe 800 seats in the audience, right? And I was like, I should have been at Radio City. It's like, you know, however many thousand. It's like one of the biggest venues in New York. And I was like, oh, what am I doing the show? Lo and behold, one of the cast members was a guy like Daniel. And we became friends, of course, because you create relationships with people. And it's not about like the job or the transaction or how big it is. Although sometimes when you do big jobs, it's like, it's nice to be like, oh, you know, I performed at Radio City or I got to do this or I was in this movie with so-and-so. Like those are fun, but it was more about like the relationships and like the journey along the way and kind of the memories you make. And so we became good friends. Lo and behold, he ended up being a casting director at Disney later. And that's when I got into hosting. I did some hosting for Walt Disney Pictures. And that led to doing the hosting for Talking Pictures, which I did for a while. And then I hosted The Place on Fox for a while. And that's actually how I came to Chamber Media, was after like all that. And after I was working at Fox hosting there for a little bit, I wasn't doing that anymore, but it was the first job I got after having my first baby. And it was a year into it, and I got a phone call, and they're like, hey, we're interested in you coming in and hosting the show for a little bit. We saw you on Talking Pictures. And it was somebody that I met. I met her when I was doing Talking Pictures, and she was over at Fox now. And I was like, sure, I'll come do that. I was like, I wasn't really planning on working. Like, for once in my life, I was like, I'm going to stay home and like enjoy being a mom, because I'd been working since I was a little kid. And I was like, I wasn't actually looking for work, but like, sure, I'll come in. Like, that'll be fun, you know? And so I hosted the show for a few months, but then it didn't turn into like anything longer than that. And then I was like, that was kind of fun working. Like, I think I want to keep working, you know? Yeah. And so I hopped on Facebook and on the Utah Film Commission, the Utah Filmmakers Facebook page, there was a post for Chamber Media, part-time producer. And I was like, okay, part-time, this is great. Then I can like still be mom, work a little bit. And then I ended up getting the job there, and I can talk about Chamber in a little bit. But lo and behold, like I traced that all the way back to like Whittier, California, doing that dinky little Christmas show with like 4 cast members when I was supposed to like do Radio City, and I turned it down. And had I met Daniel there, and like we hadn't become friends, like I wouldn't have cast, because the hosting gig I got for Disney was like a direct book. Like they weren't holding auditions through agencies. They called Disney, like Walt Disney Pictures, they called Disneyland, like he was doing all the casting for that. And they're like, hey, you guys have like hosts that like MC your shows and like performers and stuff. Do you have anybody? We're looking for 2 people basically. Yeah. And he's like, yeah, Raquel Baldwin. She's like, I won't send anybody else. So I was the only one auditioning, and I got it. But had they not liked me, they would have just been like, hey, can you send somebody else? But that was basically it. And it was him. Like that was it. I mean, there's, how many thousands of people in LA that want to do a hosting gig for Disney. Yeah. And so that was all traced back. And so even little things, if I feel like, oh, this is kind of a bummer, this isn't like the coolest job, or like, I really want to get that one, and now I'm kind of doing this little thing. And it was never about that. It was just like the experience of it all, and the people I met along the way, and how God knew way back then. Do you know what I'm saying? Because now like I work at Chamber and I love it. And there's so many things about working there that are truly blessed my life. And like, if I really trace the steps back, it just all of it includes God's hand.
It's so interesting you say that. I mean, I love it. And I'm thinking about my own life, right? And like all the rad things that have happened to me. I remember, you're doing all these auditions and you're like being on these movies and yada, yada, yada. And like you said, like some jobs are like super cool. But one of the things I love doing is like a little prank video at Sundance. Because I used to teach snowboarding, and I would go and pretend like I've never been before. I have like a thick Indian accent. I have like a sweater and jeans. And I'm like, well, I want to learn. Who is going to teach me the way? And so, and we'd always prank one of the new instructors, right? Well, lo and behold, in 2008, I was doing this, and I had just met him before, but the day before, Ben Stiller had come into the resort. Mm-hmm. And so I just briefly met him. And the next day I was doing my prank, and he was watching me, and he like waved to me. But I'm like, crap, I'm in the middle of my prank, because I just kind of give him like a little head nod. And my boss, like he was learning snowboarding, and my boss was teaching him. Mm-hmm. And he turns to my boss, he's like, what the heck, man? Like he was so nice to me. Like why was he just like kind of gives me like a little head nod? And he's like, no, listen, he's got to be incognito. He's pulling this prank on this instructor. He does this every year. So unbeknownst to me, Ben was watching me do this prank. So after I'm done and I'm like watching the video and the footage, he like comes up to me. He's like, dude, can I just shake your hand? I'm like, wait, what? He's like, that was like some of the funniest stuff I've ever seen. And so then he asks to see the footage, and I'm showing the footage, and he is crying laughing.
Oh my gosh, I love it.
Like just dying laughing. He's like, dude, this is so good. And then like the next day he was asking me all about my story, and I said, well, I actually, I'm getting into acting. I want to move to LA. He's like, oh, you want to be an actor? I'm like, yeah, but I don't want to bother you. You asked. He said, no, dude, let me give you some advice. So he sat me down for like 10 minutes and he gave me some awesome advice, gave me the number to his assistant and to his production company. And he's like, look, I can't promise anything's going to actually happen, but just go out there and give him your stuff. And he was always about creating your own path and finding your own voice and perseverance, right? Yeah. So I went out there and I ended up interning at his office for
Oh
a
my
while,
gosh.
you know? I mean, it's
that.
just like how random is that I ended up interning at Ben Stiller's office or whatever, right? But it was one of those things where, and I'm fast forwarding a little bit more to like now this was 2009. So now in 2019, 10 years later, I was in New Zealand and I was like traveling around and you know, you and I both talk about how much we love traveling.
Oh my gosh, I love it.
I know, it's just so much.
So fun.
And so I was traveling and there was this moment of time when I was hiking by myself, you know, in New Zealand. I mean, come on, I'm in New Zealand, I'm hiking, it's incredible, right? So I love doing these walk and talks with God. And like, especially when I'm in nature by myself, it's like the time for me to like just pour my heart out and be like, so how are we doing? And by how are we doing? I'm like, how am I doing? And what should I be doing? You know? And I asked him, I said, what should I be focusing on? Like, what should I, you know, what's the purpose of my life? Like, it's like everyone's kind of question, you know? And he said to me something very poignant. And I remember it was so clear and I wrote it down. But he said, like, the purpose of your life, Sharon, is to be an example to others of what could truly happen to someone who lets me love them. I'm like,
I love
whoa, dang, I like that. And that feels like really soothing. I'm like, so what do you want me to do? He's like, yeah, just let me love you. I'm like, wait, what? He's like, yeah, let me just pamper you. Let me just love you. Just keep your heart open. Let me love you. I'm like, huh. So in order for me to, he's like, yeah, you don't need to overthink this. Just open your heart.
You're
just
like,
let me love.
One more question.
Quick
just
query.
A clarifying question.
This seems a little too easy, right? Now this was 2019. 2020, the world pretty much ended. Yeah. Right? And COVID reset everything. And again, it was back to, yeah, let me just love you. Let me just do that. I'm like, yeah, but the world is like, you know, like it's like dying. It's like, don't worry about that. You just let me love you. And it was always back to that relationship, right? And so I focused on that. I'm like, I hope this isn't selfish, but love me, God, you know, I'm ready for you, you know. I'm ready. What do you need? What do you want to show me? But it was basically that. And the moment I kind of like opened my heart more to let him love me, not only did I feel amazing on the inside, but the outside changed even more. Like it started like reflecting it. And so it was almost like I was tuning into some kind of TV channel. And when I tuned in, that's the program that played. So when I tuned into God and letting him love me, that's the program that played. Just goodness and flow. And he's like, that's what it means to shine your light. It's to like let people see all the good things that are happening in your life, not because you're trying, but because you're actually letting me love you. And I feel like you're a great example of that. Your whole life, you've like let him love you. And as a result of it, like, look at all these rad things that have been happening in your whole life. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. We talked about this when we went to lunch a couple weeks ago. But one of my favorite scriptures, super simple, is like, seek and you shall find. Yeah. And I feel like if you seek out the good in things and light in things and goodness in people and situations, you'll always find it. Because there's good in everybody. If you seek out the bad in someone or a situation, you'll also always find it. Because, you know, nobody's perfect. Everybody might, you know, have a bad quality or in any situation. It's all what you seek out. And if you seek out God and you seek out goodness and you seek out love and you seek out light, you'll find it everywhere. Yeah. And if you seek out the opposite, you'll also find it everywhere, you know? And so that's just like something that I've kind of always lived my life by is in every situation, like I don't play the victim. I'm like, I could feel sorry for myself or I could look at the positive in this situation. And I always try to look at the positive, but I feel like that like is centered back again to like God. And so yeah, I feel the same way. I love that you had that experience because it was amazing. And I feel like that is just back to like the questions you asked me before of like, how do you feel like you kind of, you know, had the success here? Or like, you know, how did you stumble upon, you know, this job or that job? And it was always just like living a life of seeking the good in life and the positive in life. Because when you're a positive person, you exude positivity, right? Yeah. And then people are attracted to that, whether that is helping with your relationships or your, you know, your work opportunities or whatever. And all of that has just really just kind of come back from God and having faith that whatever happens in my life, I know that he's a part of it. I just have to be open to like letting him run it. Yeah. Right? Like open to that love and like open to like letting him guide and not trying to like, no, this is the plan I have for myself and I'm going to do this. Yes. And like, or this is, you know, this situation being like, you know what? I'm just going to let God
be in control of my life.
Yeah, let God prevail.
Let God prevail. Like let God love me and like allow myself to like love God and allow myself to have a relationship with him. It's funny that you say when you talk to God that way. I'm the same thing. I'm like, hey God, how's it going?
Yeah, I do.
How's like, you know, how are we doing?
With you? Okay.
You know what I mean? Like, feel like I've like tried to develop a pretty personal relationship with him.
Yeah.
And yeah, so totally on the same page.
I love it. I love it so much. Now, you know, part of this life, despite all the joy and stuff, we do face challenges.
Of course.
You know,
of
hardcore
course,
challenges, right?
100%.
And part of this podcast we talk about is, you know, in order for you to have lemonade, you first have to have lemons, right?
Yeah.
So was there a moment in your life where you're like, whoa, that was a tough lemon, and I was able to turn it to lemonade?
I'm trying to think. I feel like there have been a lot of them. And I don't want to sound like super cheesy or like a broken record, but I feel like one of my spiritual gifts has been gratitude. And that is like in every situation, even when I've had lemons, I found a way to be grateful for it. Did you read the book? Oh gosh, it's been so long since I've read this. I'm not even going to get it right. Oh, I'm so bummed. I can't remember the book. It's about sisters that were in concentration camps. And she tells a story about how they were forced to go into, they were forced to sleep and live for a while in a room that was like infested with fleas. Do you know the book I'm talking? I cannot believe I don't know the book. I'm gonna have to text somebody and ask this. It's like one of the, as soon as I said the name, if I remembered it, you'd be like, oh yeah, like that's like the most famous book. Everybody has read that book. Yeah. And her one sister is like, I can't, like, she's just so down and out, right? Because she's like, we are in a concentration camp. We are like in a room infested with fleas. It was like it was the most disgusting experience for her. And the other one was like, we need to pray to God. And she's like, I'm not praying to God. She's like, no, we need to pray to God. And she's like, come pray with me. And she's like, God, thank you for thank you for our lives. Thank you for being alive. Thank you for the fleas. Thank you. And she was like, I can't believe blah, blah, blah. Later, lo and behold, I'm not getting this right. So if anyone's listening, you're gonna be like, oh, I know that book. She's not telling the story right at all. But later it was, I guess something with the fleas, like they ended up getting transferred to like a different area because nobody wanted to go there. But because they were there and because it was like flea infested, they were able to read scripture. Like she had snuck like a Bible on her person and somehow got it, and was always scared that if she was found with this Bible, like they would be killed, right? Yeah. And that it was the first time they weren't guard, because the guards didn't want to go near this place. It was like this really disgusting place. And she was able to read and they were able to worship God, and that like completely blessed her life. And then it goes back to like, thank you. And then again, she was like, thank you, God, for the fleas. I knew this would bless my life. And I was like, oh, that's so incredible, right? Yeah. And it's like, I wish I were retelling the story properly, because it's really beautiful. And it just was touching, and like, it just made me cry. I'm like, somebody can be in that situation and find joy. Yeah. Like, and she was able to find joy in a place that was so like lacked so much joy, right? Yeah. And so I feel like I've tried to do that in my life. Like anytime I've had lemons, I'm like, nope. I'm not like I'm not going to focus on the lemon, right? I'm going to focus on like the lemonade part of it. Like I'm going to focus on like any part of the situation that is like positive. And if I can't find it, the only thing I can say at the end of the day is like, well, I don't see anything good about the situation, but somehow this is for my benefit, because I can recognize that God is like every situation has been eventually for my benefit. I don't know that I've had any major things but there's been many, but I think that I haven't allowed them to turn into lemons. That makes sense. Yeah. Like growing up, not like having a lot, like could feel like a little bit of a lemon, and not having, you know what I mean? Like being kind of poor, but I never really saw it that way. I mean, I did. Like it's a really terrible story to admit, but I remember when I was little, I remember during a time we didn't like have a lot of food, and we didn't have snack food, and I'm like a sugar. I'm like addicted to sugar.
I can't even tell.
In a really bad way.
Wait, what? What do you mean?
So, and growing up, even like if it was our birthday or like we did something great, like we got as like a present or a treat, like we got to pick our own box of cereal and nobody else could eat it. You know what I mean? And it was like, it wasn't like the cheap bags of cereal. It was like you got like the like
Captain
brand
Crunch.
name
cereal.
So like treats were like a very big deal growing up. So I remember this one time literally just like not having a lot of money, not having a lot of thing. Like remember, using the powdered milk in the water in our cereal. I remember like the cereal tasting disgusting. Anyway, and I remember going to my friend's house after school and she had tons of snacks at her house. And can admit something, I don't know that I've told very many people in my life, but I remember like when she wasn't looking, I would like steal food from her house and like put it in my backpack and take it home. And I remember stashing it in my closet. I remember my sister being like, where did you get this food? Where'd you get these snacks? I'm going to tell. I'm like, no, don't tell. Like, I don't want to get in trouble. I was like, I'll share them with you. Just don't tell. So my secret was safe because she also wanted snacks. But,
not anymore. This is on a public podcast.
Everybody knows. Yeah. And and I remember, and it's funny because I actually like, I think part of it was like, well, yes, of course, like I wanted things, but it was more like, well, I didn't want to have to ask my parents for it because I didn't want to make them feel bad that they maybe couldn't afford something, right? That's kind of like the dance class too. So that could have felt like a little bit of a lemon. And I think there were plenty of times because my dad, we were tomboys, so all girls. And we grew up in a farm town. My mom grew up on a milk dairy farm. Her dad was a milk farmer, milk farmer, and had a milk route. And they raised cows, and that's what they did. And so and my dad worked at John Deere, building tractors, and they were both basically like total hicks, for lack of a better word.
Totally.
And so on weekends, my dad managed his apartment building. So every Saturday, that's all I remember growing up is we had to go there and mow the lawns and like pull weeds and paint or like fix something up. And it was always something. And I remember sometimes being like, oh, I just wish that like, and all my friends growing up, I seem to be like the poorest of all my friends. Like they all got cars when they turned 16, like brand new cars and things like that. And there were plenty of times I was like, oh, I just wish that like, it
was a little bit easier for me.
It was a little bit easier. And, but I didn't live in that. Do you know what I mean? I wasn't like, my life sucks because my parents, blah, blah, blah. And I was somehow able to look at that situation and recognize that my parents were doing the best that they could. And I wanted to do the same. Like when I have kids, I want to be able to work hard in my life and provide the best that I can. And it won't be everything that they need, but it'll be the most that I can do. And they're doing the best that they can do kind of thing. So, so that, felt a little bit like, I guess, like a lemon. I got injured a lot as a dancer, which were like little tiny lemons. Like when I was dancing for the Knicks, I dislocated my kneecap and I was out.
That sounds terrible.
Terrible. Yeah. I was out for it was so terrible. I was out for 3 months, but instead of just wallowing and like, laying in bed for 3 months, not being able to do anything, I was like, okay, well, I've got to do something else with my life because if I get injured again, I don't have a job and I have no income. So what else can I do with my life? Yeah. And that's actually when I started acting. I'm like, I'll take an acting class. I've never like taken an acting class before. And I started getting into acting because I was like, oh, well, with acting, I don't have to worry about like, my body just like doing all crazy things to itself and getting injured as much. And so I got into acting and lo and behold, that like took me to LA, which took me back to Utah. And here I am. And, lots of memories along the way and lots of friendships along the way. And so like getting injured throughout because that when it's your livelihood and then you don't have the tools for your livelihood, like, my body I sprained both my ankles and I've like torn ligaments and pulled my hamstring and, lots of injuries. And when you're out, it's like, wow, if I'm not doing anything, like what is my life then? Right. And I think that was another thing that I was always grateful to have my life centered in God. So it didn't feel like I have no identity now. Like and I think that happens with a lot of people with their careers. It's like, it's like, I am a dancer or like, I am a this. And if they lose their job it's like, oh, I'm not anybody now. Like, I don't know what I am. Yeah.
It's the problem with like defining yourself with something that's external.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes. Like as opposed to an internal.
Yeah, exactly. Because like, a buddy of mine's like he's a pro tennis player and then he got injured. And he couldn't be pro anymore. Yeah. He's like, so what do you do now? Right. Yeah. And so it's always like an interesting thing to like figure out like, okay, when you're defining yourself by certain things and then that certain thing is gone. Yeah. Then it's like, where do you stand?
Yeah.
Where do you go? What do you do? How do you find the joy, you know?
It happened to me a little bit when I got pregnant with I have 2 girls, almost 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. And I have been working my whole life, and I love to work. And I love to work mostly because I love the relationships and the experiences I have because of work, you know? And also I've always done fun things for work.
Of course.
I've always like followed my passion. So it's like, if I'm like dancing on a Broadway show or like, you know, acting in a movie, it's like, it's not that hard, right? It's like super fun, right?
Yeah, it's so fun.
So I've always been one to like follow your passions, and because you can make money doing anything. Right. It's like, oh, you like to skateboard? Most people be like, skateboarding's not a career, you know, but it's like, hey, you could be Tony Hawk. Do you know what I mean?
Why not?
Right? Is he skateboarding? Am I saying that right?
You're saying it right.
I don't follow skateboarding, but
that was a great example.
That was the first thing that popped to my head was skateboarding.
That was amazing. I'm like, wow. She knows her skateboarding.
But really, it's sort of like,
and
I was grateful that my parents were like, hey, if you want to be a dancer, be a dancer. Like, that's great. Where somebody else would be like, you need to go to college, you need to be a doctor or a lawyer, you know what I mean? And my parents also didn't go to college, so they didn't have that background of like, everyone in this family goes to college and everyone gets their MBA, and they didn't go to college. So I think they were like, oh, great, you're doing, you know, you're kind of doing something fun like dance. But
it's so funny. No, I love that you're saying that, because like, my dad was always like, Sharon, you can be anything in the world when you grow up, as long as it's a doctor.
As long as it's a doctor and not an actor.
All right. Well, he didn't say that. He just said as long as it's a doctor, but he didn't say what kind of doctor. So as an actor, I fulfill that dream for him many times.
Yes.
And I'm like, Dad, I'm an anesthesiologist today. Aren't you proud of me? Here you go.
I'm a surgeon.
I'm a nurse now. Here, you know. So he's like, all right. I'm like, well, you didn't specify. This one's on you.
That's all your fault.
Yeah, this is your fault.
I was just doing what you said.
Yeah. And I did it multiple times in many different roles.
There you go.
You're welcome.
You're welcome.
You know? So we've talked about all these different things. I really just have 2 questions for you left. You know, we talked about like, you know, what brings you joy and all these things.
Yeah.
The last 2 questions though are kind of introspective ones. What is your greatest fear right now? Because you already said you were fearless. So what is the greatest fear for someone who's fearless?
I'm also a very driven person. And I think that the main fear that I've had in my life that has kind of always been there is like the fear of not reaching my potential. And I think that is not just with work, but just with like spiritually and like, you know, other capacities of my life. I was a basketball fan growing up. So the Chicago Bulls are basically our hometown state, even though I lived in Iowa, but Chicago was 3 hours away. So I watched Michael Jordan growing up. And he was like my idol, right? And I think one of his quotes is like, "You miss every shot you don't take," or whatever. There's tons of them, and that's probably somebody else. But I'm just gonna say it was Michael Jordan.
Yeah, it sounds great that he says that.
Yeah. But really, it's sort of like, oh, I didn't fulfill all the dreams I had, because I'm like an idea person and like someone who dreams big. And I feel like there's a lot of things that I've wanted to with my life and some things I've done. And I feel like there's a lot more that I want to do with my life. And I think a fear is like, oh, what if I don't reach my potential? Like, what if I don't do everything I want to do? And I think that's what also keeps me motivated to keep doing things. And maybe part why I've had some success in my life, because I'm not someone who sits around and does nothing. You know, I'm like, oh, I feel like I just want to sit around and do nothing today. But I'm like, there's somebody else like working hard. And, you know, like the harder you work, the more lucky you get. Right.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think that's probably something that I fear is, like not like living up to my full potential. And therefore maybe not having as full of a life as I want to have, you know? I'm trying to think. It's like, oh, I should have tried to do that, because now I don't know if I could have done it, type of thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I don't ever want to be like, oh, I could have. There was a quote a super long time ago that said like the worst pain is the pain of like an unfulfilled dream or something like that. And I think maybe that's been a fear of mine, is like, oh, what if I find that I'm not living like the life that I want to live?
There's this quote, you know, and it's so funny because like Matt Matson, who
Yes.
we both know.
Oh my gosh,
we
I
love
Matson.
Matt.
Okay,
Yeah.
do we have another hour?
I know we should
to talk about Matt
I know,
only.
seriously.
I could literally talk about him.
I know. Matt Matson's
Love
like
him.
the best. He's one of the greatest, and he always says like, "What's your most recent selfie? What's the
All the time, right?
You know, all the stuff, and then like you get to answer these things, and it's like really cool. But I think one of the ones that he said like, what 4 words would be like the most scariest words for you to hear if you were to hear,
Yeah.
you know, or you could have said.
Yeah.
And I thought about that, like, what 4 words?
That's a great question.
And I remember thinking, oh, I know what mine is.
What are
It's
they?
like,
What are your words?
what could have been?
Yeah.
You know, what could have been?
Yeah.
Because if I feel like I didn't, I don't know, like it's like because I limited myself because of my own limiting beliefs or whatever it is, you know, and you look back and you're like, oh, if only I just talked to that one person.
Yeah.
If I only had gotten out of my comfort zone.
Yeah.
If only I didn't feign being tired.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm not saying you're a perfect person. Like, look, you have bad days. It's totally fine. And it's
Yeah.
okay. You're not supposed to be like Mr. Superman and on all the time.
Yeah, for sure.
But at the same time, like if you just look at your whole life and think, you know, I chose to not live life
Yeah.
because of whatever reason.
Yeah.
You know, then I would regret that. I would be full of fear.
Yeah.
You know, another one, and this is like not necessarily about fear, but more about like a friend of mine asked me once. She said, "Sharon, what is it that really makes you suffer? Because you don't seem like you suffer that much."
Yeah.
She's like, "So what would make you really suffer?" And I'm like, and I didn't mean to sound arrogant at all when I said this, but I literally was saying like, honestly, knowing that other people don't enjoy life the way I do makes me suffer. And I think it's and I say that because it's like, man, I do have an extreme enjoyment of life.
Yeah.
And of memories and of the present moment and like the relationships and friendships. Like I look forward to waking up. I look forward to like doing stuff. Yeah. It's just fun, right? Yeah. But you know, I was talking to my bishop in my church ward, and we were having this conversation, and he said, you know what? He's like, for some people, getting in their car to come to church is like the greatest thing that they can do. Or getting up out of bed is like their biggest victory. Yeah. And I think about that and I'm like, wow, you know, like everyone's got their own path. Yep. And you know, like, hey, if that's a huge milestone for you, fantastic. Yeah. You did it. And that's awesome. Congratulations, you know? But I look at my life and I just think like, man, I wish other people could like enjoy this as much as I do. Like I remember I was driving. It was so funny. I was driving to Escalante and God was just doing magical wonders in the sky. You know, like the sun was setting, there had been some rainfall, and there was like this rainbow that popped up. And I immediately had to pull over. I was like, I don't care where I'm at. I got to pull over. I got to take pictures. I got to just bask in this moment. And people were just driving. And I'm like, you guys, do you understand what's happening in nature right now? Everything is happening all at once. And it was incredible. And I just remember thinking like, yeah, I just have this insane enjoyment of life. Yeah. And I feel sad that other people don't experience it to the depth that I feel like I do. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, for sure. So, that's one thing. But the last question I actually have for you is I feel like you've always been this way, but like if you could build a time machine, okay, you could build a time machine and you can go back in time and you can meet the young Raquel Baldwin, the one that is living kind of in a poor household, the one that feels like she has to steal snacks because she loves her sweet tooth. That Raquel. What would you tell that Raquel? Oh, gosh. That's a great question. Thank you. Thank you so much. You're so good at this. Oh, come on. I like it. This is so fun. It's like you've been doing this for a while. Yeah. Oh, gosh. I think one of the things I would tell myself is to treat everybody with kindness. I feel like there's not enough love in the world. There's not enough love to other people. And I think one of the things I've struggled with is like when I get stressed or upset, like I have like a tendency to like take my stress out maybe on other people. And it could come across as like maybe not being super kind. I'm also like a pretty like thick-skinned person.
and pretty tough, you know, and I wasn't pampered growing up. And so I have a little bit of like a tough exterior that, and one of the people I worked with before, she's like, I think it's always funny when people say like, oh, it's just business, it's not personal. Mm-hmm. And she's like, because I have said that before. I'm like, it's just business, not personal. Like just this needs to get, you know what I mean? And, and I've learned, and something that I feel like I'm working on and I'm trying to get better at is just, when I feel stressed or things like that, just handling everything that I'm going through in my life with kindness towards others. And not that I'm an unkind person, because I don't think that I am, but I would say that everyone is struggling with something, you know, totally. And you don't even know. And I think that when I think of all the I broke my toe, as you know, and when I did, everyone has been so kind. Like everyone has been so, and it's better now, but like especially the first couple of days, I had a guy at work let me borrow his knee stroller, somebody borrowed crutches. People were like constantly doing so many things for me. And I just thought, everyone is so nice. Like, that's so kind. Like, you could see physically that like I was struggling with something, but I think people are struggling with things all the time, you know, right. And struggling with things emotionally, things like, you know, internally that aren't obvious on an external level, that it's just nice when people are kind. Totally. And when I think of some of the most beautiful relationships that I've had and friendships I've had in the past, it's just with like people that are so kind and so loving. And I just want to be that for somebody else. Yeah. And I think that like being someone who's really driven and ambitious, and I think that I have tended in my life to just like have a lot of laser focus. Yeah. I'm not like I'm very much a go-getter. And I think sometimes when you're like focused on a goal, or you know what I'm saying, that you kind of like, you aren't as aware of the surroundings and people around you. You're just like, I'm, you know, driven, got my eye on the ball, right? Yeah. And I think that and it's funny because I broke my toe, and it's just allowed me to like slow down my life quite a bit. And the less that I'm like laser focused on something, the more I'm able to see more things around me and like kind of slow down and be like, oh, and I think that I would, if I could go back, that would be something that I would have wanted to do more in my life, is just, and I don't consider myself a selfish person. Like, oh, I wish I wasn't selfish my whole life. And, you know, and so I feel like I try to serve others and try to be aware of others and love others and share and be inclusive and, you know, things like that. But I also think that at times when maybe I was so focused on myself, maybe I could have been more available for somebody else that really needed it. It makes sense. Yeah. And that's something I would have loved to do more, because I think that, because I love my career and I loved all the you know, career paths that I've taken. And it's a big blessing in my life. I can like provide for my family, and I also enjoy my work, and I get to meet amazing people like you, and you know, and things like that, and travel and do some fun things. But people are the most important things, you know, in your relationships. 100%. And I think in my life, I've tended at times to be more focused. Sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes like my priorities or like my focus is a little, you know, gets just a little out of whack. Makes sense. And when, in the times when I am like, my focus is like 100% on God, not as much on like the exterior things, then I'm able to focus more on like people and serving. And those are the times, if I look back in my life, that I was like absolutely the happiest. Like when you know what I'm saying? Like I'm a convert to the church. I grew up Catholic. And during the time of learning about the gospel and sharing with my family, that was a time when I look back on my life and all the, like there's highlight things like in my career that were like really fun, and that I can look back on and be like, that was like such a great moment. And that was such a great time in my life. But I think that the reflections that are the most rewarding and that brought the most joy had to do with other people. and not myself and like my aspirations in life, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that when I think about having like the happiest life and the most joyful life, it's always more about
other people
than myself.
Yeah.
And I think that as someone who's like driven, it's easy to like, you know, be a workaholic. And then it's like, oh, I worked, you know, 12 hours today and I didn't see my kids. Or doing saying like, oh, I worked 80 hours like this week, every week for the last month and I didn't see my kids. And and then it's like, oh yeah, like I accomplished these great things and like this was really fun. But then my life just actually wasn't as great because you know what I'm saying? I was too focused on one area and not like
the overall picture, right?
Yeah, and not having a balance. And so I think that that's what I would say is like always keep a really healthy balance.
I love that.
In life because I feel like I try to do that for the most part and make room for everything and everything that I want in my life, but there's only so much time in the day.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So you have to prioritize and that would be one thing is just to like have more balance and always show kindness because people need it. People need love.
They absolutely do. You know, I often, I love that you were saying all the stuff you were saying because sometimes I look at my life and I think, okay, I'm going to pretend that I'm in the future and looking back on my life.
Yeah.
What would be the thing of most value when I think about that? And when I think about the things that of most value, it was always like, had to do with relationships.
Yeah.
And memories that I made with my friends and all that stuff. And then work was the vehicle that allowed us to have these experiences.
Yeah.
But work was never like the destination. It was never the main attraction.
Yeah.
Work was in the background, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I look at like, it's so funny because I was in this movie once that it's like this suspense movie. I was like one of the actors in it. And I always joke that it got 5 stars on Netflix. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's amazing. Congratulations. And I'm like, to be fair, only one and a half of those. Only one and a half of those stars were red. The other 3 were white. But there were 5 stars that I counted. To
oh my gosh,
clear.
I love it.
Dude, it's like my favorite
I'm gonna
thing.
use that.
You have to because it's just like, they're like, oh, so it was. I mean, it was really very poorly. but the thing was, the experience of making that movie was unbelievable.
Yeah.
Like I had so many fun memories joking around with the cast, and like I had such deep conversations with the cast. I mean, one of the girls in the cast was going through a breakup, and she and I spent a lot of time together because a lot of our scenes were together. So she and I would like go off and like just talk about these like really deep, poignant conversations. It was amazing. And the director was so generous, and he really taught me so much about acting and like helped me out a ton. Again, the movie was whatever, but see, the thing was that same director, you know, he had talked to me about making more movies and all these things and all the stuff that he wanted to do. Well, he got cancer and he passed away. In 2020, he passed away. And so I look at the movie and I'm like, dude, that movie is worth so much to me.
Yeah.
You know, it's worth so much to me because of the experience of it.
Yeah.
So the actual like physical, like this is the transaction, this is the work, this is this. To me, that's like the background.
Yeah.
It's like, what about the relationships? What about the people? Like, were they benefited? Were they uplifted?
Yeah.
And and I've been thinking a lot about this because, you know, so much of our focus has been like, what are you going to do with your life? And how can you make yourself big? And like, sometimes I think about the New Age movement, like you can manifest anything in the world. You can do this, you can do that. And I'm like, yeah, but a lot of that I feel is like to build your own ego.
Yeah.
But for me, it's like, well, Christ said to forget yourself and to serve him, to build his kingdom, you know, to establish his plan. And I'm like, yeah, like that to me brings way more joy than like, what can I get, you know?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think it's a good reminder to always remember kindness trumps all, you know, and like being able to like along the path, you know, like that audition that you, or that part that you got in Whittier where you're like, this is such a small thing, but the relationship you made was so significant, right? So,
and my kind of going back, what I would tell myself, my sister, you mentioned your friend who passed away from cancer. She passed away from cancer, and we didn't have a really great relationship. We fought all the time. Like I have really great relationship with my other sisters, and she was kind of like the black sheep of the family. And as I've gotten older, I've had lots and lots and lots of reflections on my relationship with her, and so many ways that I could have helped her be a happier person. And I didn't. And that's like one of the things I can't wait to reunite with her, you know, like someday, and to be able to like embrace her and share some love and kindness to her that she really needed in her life, because she was always a black sheep. And so we had a hard time connecting with her, because it was like, oh my gosh, like what is wrong with, you know what I mean? And as I've gotten older, you know, when you have kids, your life changes, you know? And so when I say older, I mean like when I had kids mostly.
Yeah.
When I had kids, I finally grew up. Yeah. It took me like, 40 years to finally grow up. But yeah, like having kids and has really just I've learned so much about love and God's love, actually, having kids, which is a whole nother topic. But that was one of the things like that I'm going to add to my answer that I had earlier. If I could go back, like I would really want to cherish and develop the relationship, because you never know when a relationship's gone, you know? Yeah. And she was 36 when she passed away from cancer. So she was super young, wasn't married, didn't have kids. And I think about like how the things I could have done in retrospect to like help her have more of a full, happy life. Yeah. Before she, didn't have it. Yeah. And that was like, I don't know that I would call that like a lemon in my life, but I definitely, out of like that trying time in my life, it's hard to lose a sibling. It's hard to lose a loved one. And I feel like I've learned a lot of lessons from that. And that's one of them, is just cherishing the people around you and loving them and showing kindness, because everybody needs it. And then you don't know how long you'll be able to like have that relationship with somebody. So yeah, that kind of adding to my answer there, of that's one thing I wish I would have done. And I think that those experiences, when you have experiences like that, where you feel regret for something, it just helps you be better moving forward. It's like, I know what that feels like, to like get bad about that. And I feel like regret that, and even times when I'm like, I remember she came to visit me and we weren't getting along, and I just felt like I was being really nasty towards her. And like, I just don't want to ever feel that way again. Like I don't ever want to feel bad about that. So I don't ever want to like treat somebody poorly. You know what I'm saying? And like, sibling rivalry is like a real thing. I didn't have it. None of my other sisters, none of us had it with each other, but everyone had it with her. Even my parents, you know what I mean? But that was somebody that needed even more love then. Do you know what I'm saying? And being able to, like, if one of my kids were, like kind of a black sheep and struggled with connecting and getting along with anybody, like I would want everybody, including myself, to show her even more love. Right. Because I would hate to think of my little girl like not having friends and not, you know what I'm saying? It'd be hard, yeah. So that's, definitely one thing in my life. I don't look back and think like, oh, I wish I would have worked harder and gotten this job or that job, because it's like, I was blessed with a lot of things. And of course there's like, a lot of other things I would love to do, but I don't need those things in my life to be happy. Yeah. But I need other things in my life to be happy, you know? And being able to focus on those. And because sometimes like some of the things that aren't things you can put on a resume, you don't really realize, like, because it takes time to develop all of your attributes, right? And it's like, it's easy to be like, checklist, I did this, college degree, blah, 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 this job, like, family, spouse, like, you know what I mean? House, like all the things on your list. It's like, could appear to make somebody like, that person's like the epitome of success. Like that is the life that I would want. Kind of like Instagram life. It's like, oh wow, this is like, look at all these people having this great life and they have like all these things they can check off. But I found that, and like we've talked about, some of those accomplishments are really awesome. Like they are super important to me. It's not like I'm like, it doesn't matter if I did all those. Like those things were those things weren't just like cool accomplishments, but the experience around that like helped define me as a person and helped develop some of the other skills. But I feel it's the things that the skills and the attributes and the things that like aren't on a resume, that aren't like in a edited Instagram photo. Do you know what I mean? That like really make a person like a full person and a happy person and a person that like can feel joy in their life. And I think that those are the things that like I want to continue to develop. Yeah. Not only for myself, but you know, for my kids. When you're a parent, it's like your kids are you. It is crazy to see my kids act like me. And like in good ways, it's great. And in other ways, I'm like, oh gosh,
that's who I am.
She's really bossy. You know what I mean? It's like she's acting like me, and I don't like that. And so I don't like that about myself, right? And it's like you literally have like this mirror reflection of yourself that maybe like you never notice until you see somebody. You're like, that is literally the way I'm behaving, and I need to fix that. I need to work on that, right? And so I think that being able to go back, I would tell myself to develop those things, even if they're not as obvious on a resume, they're going to make your life better. Totally. They're going to make your life happier. And like finding, you know, our home growing up, wasn't centered in God. We grew up Catholic, but we would go to church maybe most Sundays, but it just wasn't. Like God was not the center of our lives, period. And once God was the center of our lives, and once we all like, you know, kind of built a relationship with God, and our whole family dynamic changed.
Isn't that amazing?
It was like night and day. I mean, it's beautiful. It's like the most beautiful thing to like see somebody become like a better person. Yeah. And I would want to be able to like, and I had like the privilege, God like gave me the privilege of being able to share the gospel with my family, who all like, you know, joined, like got baptized, and then like that extended, you know, my, like there are so many extensions of that. It's like, you can count the number of apples from a seed, but you can't count the number of seeds from an apple. Wait, how does that saying go?
I don't know, but it sounded amazing.
You can count the number of apples from a seed. Wait, hold on. Count the number of seeds from an apple here. Yeah, you can count the number of seeds
in an apple,
but you can't count the number of like apples from a seed, right? Yeah. Something like that.
It sounds incredible.
And it's like there's a seed planted, and there's so many lives that were like blessed from like that one seed, right? And I would just have wanted to like, I would want to like always do that in my life. So
it's so fun.
Times in my life where I got a little like focused on my career, I wasn't focusing on, you know what I mean, other things. Like it would be nice to go back and just have that like be center all the time in my life, right? Yeah. And that's okay that it wasn't, and that's okay to like, you're not always perfect, and you're not always like doing everything you're supposed to be doing, but
we're work in progress.
It was a work in progress, but those are the things that made me the most joy, like had brought the most joy. And so I would just want, when you're a parent, you want your kids to be happy. Yeah. And it really, really, like being a mom has totally changed the way that I like my relationship with God and the way that God loves me. And I love that you were telling your story about you had that walk in New Zealand and God spoke to you. And we've talked about this before, where you feel like, you know, God, like that is a big thing, is like God's trying to love you and you just want to let him love you, you know? And like learning how God loves you and how to be loved by God. I feel like I've learned, like my relationship with him has changed so much having kids, because you love your kids like they're your whole life. Like you just want them to be so happy. And you try to guide their life in ways because you just know that path will make them happier than this path. You know what I mean? But if they choose this path, it like has nothing to do with how much like you love them. Yeah. And it's like, you know, and so I feel like it's like developed my relationship with God even more. I'm not a person that like feels shame, because I think God is like just a person of love, and you know, and so I'm never like, oh, I feel so ashamed of myself for doing it. It's like, I did this and I could have done something, like I could have made a better choice and I didn't, and there it is, and like next time we'll maybe make a better choice, you know. And I don't feel bad about myself, because I feel like God loves me even if I'm making decisions that
aren't like
that aren't like on point with what he would like for me. And it's like the same thing. It's like that's how being a parent, it's like if my girls make decisions, and they're like 2 and 5, so they're not making any decisions that are like
they're making life decisions.
Yeah, they're not making any life decisions right now. But it's not going to make me want to love them anymore. It just makes me like go, oh, I've been there. Like, I know that maybe this isn't going to make you happy. This is going to make you more happy, or like, you know what I mean? And I just don't want them to go through it, but you have to.
That's the point.
And that's how you like become the person that you are, right? So anyway.
Oh, I love it.
I don't even remember what the question was.
You know
I feel like I just talked for like an hour.
It was amazing.
I think our time is up.
That was amazing. No, you know what? This has been awesome.
Sorry.
No, I appreciate it. This has been awesome. And we are going to wrap up. But I just want to thank you so much for coming on, because you're such a light. You've been such a good example to me in my own life. I love working with Chamber Media because I get to hang out with you.
Yay.
And that's so fun. And I'm excited for the future projects that we have coming up.
Yep.
But yeah, like this has been so good. I love that we didn't go in with a plan. Because it's led to some beautiful conversations and beautiful things. And hopefully people listening today can hear some great things. But if nothing else, that God is so good. Yeah. And that if we are rooted in him, amazing things can transpire.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyway, so thank you so much, Raquel, for this convo.
Thank you.
Yep. Thanks so much for listening to the Lemonade Stand podcast, and we hope you enjoyed this episode. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you use to be alerted when we release new episodes. We'd also love to hear your feedback in the reviews, and if you or someone you know has an awesome Lemonade Stand story, please reach out to us on social media and let us know. Thanks so much, and have a great day.